Thank you very much for coming on this warm Wednesday afternoon. I really appreciate it. I'm going to give a talk about the topic children as researchers. My name is Nina from Assen and I have a background in pedagogical sciences here in Leiden. So I'm very keen to hear also your experience of maybe doing research with children, doing projects with children. So please feel free to make any comments or ask any questions during the presentation or after. Now, please bear with me because I can't see my own slides on the laptop. And I'm wired up. Alright. So, I work in the center of Leiden in a former orphanage. And this orphanage is now has been rebuilt as a new Dutch child rights home. I used to work for an international organization there called International Child Development Initiatives. And they were also more or less the founders of this idea that this orphanage where a lot of children have lived and suffered over these past hundreds of centuries would be a great place for children to come to now. So there are now children's rights organizations like Defense for Children, we have an international organization, there is a children's rights shop as we call it, and there are some few other organizations, and also the owner of this building is now the Utopa Foundation. It's no longer the city council anymore. The Utopa Foundation bought the building and is renting this building out. So feel free to come by. It's next to the Burgt, the old hill in Leiden. Right. When we look at children as researchers, this obviously also has to do with how we look at children. Do we see children as merely objects, for example? Then we kind of tend to do research about them, where the science where I'm from, pedagogical sciences, we do a lot of research about children. You know, we observe them, or we interview them, or we interview their parents or their teachers. We can also say, well, actually children, we can also see them as subjects. How can we do research with them? How can we do them among them? How can we, for example, observe in a classroom, do interviews with them, or maybe even let them do some interviews? And then finally, the view of seeing children as participants in research. Can they take a lead, for example, in designing the research, in conducting the research, in analyzing the research? And this particular field is quite new, and I think it's very exciting, and it's something that we've been experimenting with in the Children's Rights Home. Why is research by children important? Well, first of all, it has to do with the rights of the child. The rights of the child have been set now in the Universal Declaration on the Rights of the Child in 1989. And these rights are quite encompassing, a quite broad field of rights that makes this treaty quite unique. These are, for example, provision rights. Children have the right to food, to shelter, to education. Also protection rights. Children should be protected against abuse, for example. But also there's a few articles about participation. Children have a right to be heard, for example. They have a right for their opinion to be taken seriously. And these are the rights that we tend to focus on when we talk about children as active researchers. For example, Article 12. It says that to the child who is capable of forming his or her own views, he has the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child. And also Article 13 that says the child has a right to seek information and also has a right to freedom of expression and through various means of media, for example. So these are the two rights of the CRC, that's the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, how do you develop children as researchers? I just said it's quite a new thing, but in the UK, there are a lot of things happening in this field. And when I went to a seminar in Hull a few years ago, I was quite inspired by the research done at Open University by a lady called Mary Kellett. She's a professor, and she developed this Children Research Center. And I'd like to show you their website.
I just came twice.
Sorry.
Oh, just keep that.
Okay, we'll just click on this. There. If you have the time please have a look at this very interesting research that's being done by children, as I said, in the UK. You can scroll by year, you can click on it, and you see these wonderful presentations by children as young as 10 years old or even younger. For example, what do children think about reading and writing stories? You just open a PowerPoint by Janice, age 10. Let's see if that works. There. And you have these very interesting research presentations, all done by children. And they're actually quite good, and some of them have written reports, and some of them have written articles in peer-reviewed journals. So, I mean, various topics. Now, we go back to where we were. There. I'll give a few other topics. Research that was done in 2005. Hey, I'm 9, not 6, by 2 children who were age 10 who investigated children looking younger than their age and how they were treated in the schoolyard. So this had to do with observation, with interviews, and they also give suggestions to their teachers following these results. Another research was done by children the question was, do children eat a balanced diet? They were wondering if the children who bring food, for example, to school, if they actually eat the food that they bring, or do they eat other things, with their pocket money. And they did research by taking photographs of all the individual lunch boxes, and they analyzed them, and they said, well, so many percentage has, sweets, and so many has fruit, and all these things. And they also found out that children, not all children, for example, bring something to drink to school. And of course there's a water fountain, but these children are not likely to go there because the playing area is so far away from where the water fountain is. And I think these are things that only children can find out, right? I mean, these are questions I think most adults won't even ask themselves. This is quite a nice example of original research by children. And another final one is, are girls and boys treated differently in school? And this was done by actually just tallying different things in a classroom. How many boys are told off during 1 hour, how many girls are told off, how many girls are given a chance to answer versus how many boys. And they also did some interviews. What do boys and girls think? Are they treated differently? And it actually was very different in the different classes. If you were in grade 3 or in grade 6, quite a difference actually. Actually, the older the kids were, the more difference there was. The more they were treated differently, they thought. And I think that's quite interesting. And I think there are many benefits of doing research with children. Not so much for themselves. I mean, obviously, it's great if these kids learn skills, it sharpens their writing, their communication, their critical thinking skills, organization skills, teamwork skills. Also, when they choose their own topic, this is great, of course, for motivation and ownership. Kids get really excited. But also, I think just, if we be honest, it also creates some new knowledge that we probably wouldn't have found out as adults. Questions we probably wouldn't even have asked. And some people say, well, actually, peer research does encourage more intimacy. If kids interview kids, they're likely to tell more or give maybe more truthful answers than if it were adults, because there's always this power relationship. Of course, there are barriers of doing research with children. Well, let's start with age and competence. Can they do what we ask them to do? It's not easy doing research, as you all know. Do they have the knowledge, and do they have the skills? But I think, let's be honest, most adults don't have research skills. We need to teach them. We went to school, we went to college, we went to university, and that's where we learned these research skills. So why not teach children these skills? So 3 years ago, we started our own research group with children in the Child Rights Home. We have a picture of the first group of kids there. The project was developed by International Child Development Initiatives and by the Alexander Foundation. and it was funded by the Utopa Foundation. It has been running for 3 years now, and we are targeting kids from the last primary school class. So these are kids from age 10 to 12, let's say, in the Netherlands. These kids come 10 Wednesday afternoons to the Child Rights House. They have sessions of about an hour and a half. And we try and target different schools. So we try to get a big mix of kids from various backgrounds, so to speak. So the goals of the project are kind of threefold. We try to create new knowledge from the children's perspective. We try to contribute to their cognitive, their social and communication skills. And finally, we contribute to their knowledge about children's rights. Because we actually start this project about talking about children's rights with the children. And most children in the Netherlands are not aware of their rights. It's probably very different in other countries where it's part of the curriculum or children have heard elsewhere. But in the Netherlands, there's not so much knowledge about children's rights by the children. So from these we do actually a game. I sort of brought the game because it's quite a fun game. The kids have to guess. We have different pictures of different rights, if it's a real right or a fake right, and they get really into it. And from that, they choose their theme. So if we've made a research ladder, and they start at the bottom, they choose a theme on the basis of these rights, and then they gather information. That's how you start, right? You want to know what's known about your topic. Then they develop a research question. They choose their research method accordingly. They develop their research method. It could be a questionnaire, or it could be an observation technique, or it could be interviews. And then they start gathering the data. They come back and they analyze the data with us. We answer the research question, and then they present their results for an audience of parents, teachers, and whoever is interested. So here is a girl from the first year giving a presentation about toys. She was wondering if children get enough toys, are happy with their toys, and also free time to spend with their toys. And she had about 220 people listening to her presentation, because it was also the day of the opening of the Child Rights House. Over the years, children have chosen different topics. For example, bullying in school, the right to play, the right to be heard, freedom of religion, actually quite a diverse range of topics. On what we do, we also have an idea box where kids every week can put in their messages, things that they felt we could do better, or things maybe they just want to give a compliment or whatever. They put their ideas. They can also come to us, but just as a sort of anonymous way of giving their comments, they can put a little piece of paper in the idea box. I've also collected the comments over the years, what we received, and most of them are actually quite positive, so we're happy with those. Like, it's a lot of fun, I always look forward to it, or I like it better here than at home. But they can be quite picky about the food and the drink that we serve. For example, there should always be normal Coke, because Diet Coke contains artificial sweeteners, and that's not good for the brain. And actually, a lot of the times, kids make comments about the brain, like, oh, I'm getting a brain freeze, and who have to think so much? But always in a fun way. It's not, it's not like a school environment. We have about 10 children who come on the Wednesday afternoon. It's very informal. We do these games with them. And they know they have to think and they have to do research, but it's also a lot of fun. And they're also quite surprised when the next week there is Diet Coke. Or, we've done something with their ideas. Also, we noticed that the kids wanted to be quite creative, even when they're doing quite analytical things. They really wanted to just draw or just express themselves. And to prevent them expressing themselves on just beautiful refurbished walls, we bought a piece of paper, which we call the inspiration roll. And this is where they just doodle and scribble and whatever. Then some important lessons that we've learned over the years is that, first of all, you do want to make a link with sort of society. These children do research on various topics, and although they're very interesting piece by piece, it's also important for us to make a link. If these kids do research on bullying with school, we want the school involved. It would be great, of course, if the school also would do something with the results. And sometimes it's also a challenge, because the schools might not be as committed, or One girl, for example, she did some research about children, how if the voice of children is heard, not just in school, but also at the city council. And luckily, we have an alderman who was quite enthusiastic and said, okay, after the presentation, let's talk further. Let's talk a bit more about your research, how the city council can involve children a bit more. So for us, it's quite important. It's not just they're presenting and everybody claps and that's that. Second, adequate supervision is needed. We have about 3 or 4 supervisors each year, and even though it's only 10 children, we do need at least 3 or 4 sort of coaches for the kids. It's all new to them, especially if they choose their own topics. They're all individuals, or some of them do research in a group. We do encourage to do research in a group, but if they do it individually, we do need to help them a bit more. So, yeah, we've come to realize 3 or 4 supervisors on 10 children. Usually it's 2 interns and 2 colleagues. Now finally, 2 other things. Children from disadvantaged backgrounds. I said we wanted to have a mix of different schools here in Leiden. I don't know if you've noticed, but there's quite a big difference in social backgrounds from different schools in Leiden. And the schools where children come from who have sort of disadvantaged backgrounds, for us it's quite hard to work with them. First of all, we are in a beautiful location in the center of Leiden, and this is an area that they hardly go to, you know. They might live in the north of Leiden, and they hardly, well, maybe for shopping, but you know, they don't really come to the city center. They don't feel very comfortable there. Secondly, the schools are not so much, they have a lot of things on their plate, and for them to contribute extra time towards this project to stimulate these kids, you know, what did you learn this Wednesday? How was it, you know? Whereas the kids from the other schools, it will be the parents who will do that, who will say, oh, that's wonderful, what kind of research have you done? These are usually highly educated parents who know about research and who are very interested. And then finally, dissemination of the results. As I've mentioned, it's not just the kids presenting their results for an audience, we also seek connection with society. But I also think we should do a bit more in disseminating our results. We don't have a website like they have at the Open University where all the presentations are online, you can download them. I also haven't published with these kids yet. I think it's something that they really should be doing, to just get whatever research we have, get it out there. I would like to focus my final part of the presentation on ethics. It's something that we also emphasize during the research project. Well, you all know about ethics. It relates to the application of a system of moral principles, what is good, do no harm, etc. It also has to do with the cost-benefits ratio, the research that I'm doing, how does it weigh up against the negatives. It has to do with respect and justice, for example, for the subjects that you're studying, about their rights, the best outcomes for them. On a macro level, we usually have an ethics committee, don't we, at the university or maybe a research institute where you're doing your research. But also we talk with the kids about making choices on a more micro level. When you're doing the interview, for example, what questions do you ask? What questions do you not ask? You know, will you secretly film or not? All these kind of things. We do it in a kind of a drama way. We kind of let them do some kind of play and then let the other kids say, is this right? Is this wrong? Should we be doing this? Should we be doing that? And the kids really love that. And they don't know that this is about ethics. We don't necessarily teach them these, sort of difficult, abstract terms. We teach them about what's good, what's not good. And that's how we talk with them about doing research. Also about informed consent, when they're distributing their questionnaires, for example. Are there people that they're interviewing, are they protected from abuse, for example? Can you ensure confidentiality and anonymity? We also tell them, think about these things in advance, but you can't anticipate everything in advance. But at least the kids have thought about it. I'll just leave this slide, if you don't mind. There is a debate about if ethics with children, doing research with children, is different from the ethics of doing research with adults. And of course, the sort of moral codes for doing research with adults do apply to children as well. I mean, do no harm, do good, respect, etc. But I think there's also a difference. Children's competencies are different. If you're doing research with children, you might need to adapt your research methods, for example, to something that they understand. It could be too difficult. Children can also be potentially vulnerable. I mean, that's obvious. And adults have the power, not just the power to interpret data in any way they please, but there will always be this power relationship. If you're, even now, we as supervisors dealing with these children, we try and combat these power relationships, but I mean, we can't be children. I mean, I can never be a child anymore. I'll always be an adult, so these power relationships will always be there. And then finally, I think when the children have done their results and they've presented it, I think it's always interesting how adults react to it, Do they say, oh, that's really sweet, that's sort of children's research? Or do they take it seriously and say, actually, it's not different from the research that we do. They've taken all the, for example, the same steps that we normally would have done. They've looked at reliability, validity, ethics, and so on, and they really take it seriously. So I just put these two pictures up. A child and a professor. Who is right in the end? Who has status? And I wish actually I wasn't the one giving this presentation, but one of the kids who have done research and did the presentation. Unfortunately, it's summer holidays. It's very hard to reach anybody. That's quite last minute also. So if you like, you can get some, I have brought some leaflets. Unfortunately, it's in Dutch about a children's research group. This is what we give to the kids when we go to the different schools, and then they can apply on the website. So this was my presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. If there are any questions, then feel free.
Thank you, Nina.
Thanks.